What if someone or something was always one step ahead of you, not just watching from afar, but guiding your every move with eerie precision? It might sound like the opening to a sci-fi thriller, but for a handful of people across different walks of life, this strange possibility has taken on an unsettling reality. It starts subtly. A phone rings at just the right moment. A note appears where it shouldn't. A computer flashes warnings for problems that haven't yet occurred. These aren't stories from the fringe. They're detailed accounts from professionals, parents, scientists, and responders who found themselves the beneficiaries of impossible foresight. This is a story about 10 cases, 10 lives, that were quietly transformed by interventions so precise they defy coincidence. An investment banker avoids ruin thanks to a phone call from a number that doesn't exist. A mother saves her child because of a handwritten note slipped inside a cereal box. A software engineer debugs code that hasn't yet been written with the help of an invisible assistant. The tales differ in details but share one unmistakable thread: knowledge that shouldn't exist. And this knowledge goes far beyond luck. It's timely, tailored, and deeply personal. It doesn't just know what's happening, it seems to know what's coming. And more chillingly, it seems to understand what people are thinking before they've acted on those thoughts. These stories have no obvious culprit. Investigations reveal no hacking, no surveillance devices, no footprints of any human or artificial agent. The messages come from nowhere. The warnings vanish after serving their purpose. In every case, the help is perfect. And then, just as suddenly, it's gone. But the pattern remains. Predictive guidance arrives, disasters are averted, success is secured. Then the connection is severed. Always with the same implication: the mission is complete. As we unfold these accounts, we'll walk through mystery after mystery, not to sensationalize, but to examine, to ask, what kind of intelligence could know the future? How could it understand individual lives so intimately? And why would it choose to intervene? Perhaps this isn't surveillance in the way we usually understand it. Perhaps it's not about control or power, but precision, some vast system orchestrating events with silent logic. Or maybe it's something else entirely. This documentary isn't about proving or disproving anything. It's about exploring the space between randomness and reason, between chaos and coordination. It's about questioning the stories we think we understand and wondering what we've missed. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. So we begin with a simple question that unfolds into 1,000 more. What if the coincidences in your life aren't coincidences at all? It started with a phone call. David Morrison, a high-powered investment banker, was used to stress, deadlines, and unpredictability. But nothing prepared him for the morning in March 2018 when his phone rang on the way to a make-or-break meeting. The number looked familiar, his own area code, but something was off. The prefix didn't exist in any known database. Still, he answered. A calm male voice instructed him to take a different route. The usual way, it said, was about to be blocked by an accident. David hesitated. It sounded absurd. But minutes later, stuck behind emergency vehicles and twisted metal, he realized the impossible. The caller had known the future. That was just the beginning. Over the next 3 years, David received dozens of calls, each one precise, timely, and life-altering. A tip to pull out of a stock hours before a crash. A warning to leave a building moments before a gas leak. Information about a client's criminal background before anyone else knew. The guidance wasn't just accurate, it was intimate. The voice seemed to understand his thoughts, worries, even plans he hadn't shared. One day, just as he was beginning to suspect a client of fraud, but before he had acted on the suspicion, the voice called and told him to sever ties immediately. The client was arrested the following week. David began to feel like his entire life was being tracked, not just his location or emails, but his mind. He consulted cybersecurity experts. There were no bugs, no leaks, no signs of tampering. Yet occasionally, his devices would display files or information he had never accessed, data that turned out to be exactly what he needed at the time. He tried tracing the calls. Telecom companies confirmed the numbers had no origin. They weren't routed through standard phone lines or digital networks. Somehow, they were coming from outside any known system. In 2021, it ended as abruptly as it began. One final call warned him about a conspiracy within his firm. He took action, avoided legal catastrophe, and watched his former partners go to prison. The voice returned once more, only to say, "Assignment complete." And then, silence. For David, the silence was almost more haunting than the voice. He had come to rely on the guidance, even if he never understood it. Without it, he felt exposed, vulnerable, alone again in the chaos of his decisions. Looking back, he couldn't decide what troubled him more, the possibility that he had been watched by an advanced intelligence, or that it had moved on to someone else. We often think of surveillance as sinister. Cameras on street corners, metadata trails, algorithms selling our data. But what if there's a form of observation that's quieter, more surgical, one that knows what you need before you do? One that's not trying to sell you something, but trying to save you? Was David's experience the result of a benevolent AI, an undisclosed technology, or something stranger still? He doesn't know. And perhaps we aren't meant to. But it leaves us with a chilling question. If your best decisions were never really yours, would you want to know? The first message came folded inside a cereal box. Sarah Chen thought it was a prank. A handwritten note, tucked carefully beneath the plastic liner, warned her about a severe allergic reaction her daughter might have to a newly prescribed medication. It listed the drug, the dosage, and a rare genetic marker that made it dangerous. The timing was bizarre. Her daughter had just been prescribed the medication days earlier. Sarah hadn't yet filled it. The warning saved her child's life, but how could anyone have known? When she brought the note to her pharmacist, they confirmed the warning was valid. The medication could cause adverse effects, but only in extremely specific genetic cases. It wasn't in any medical database. It would have required knowledge of her daughter's full genome. Over the months that followed, more notes appeared, always handwritten, always hidden in products Sarah purchased regularly. A box of crackers carried a warning about a faulty car seat her family used. A frozen pizza contained a message advising her to avoid a particular intersection that would soon be blocked by road construction. A bottle of juice included a suggestion to change her son's walking route to school. Days later, that original route was the scene of a hit-and run. These weren't vague premonitions. They were exact, actionable, and always correct. Each message seemed to understand her family's daily habits with uncanny accuracy. The notes referenced bedtime conversations, private arguments, and even career discussions between Sarah and her husband. It wasn't just that someone was watching. It was as if someone was living inside their lives. She contacted store managers, hoping to find an explanation, but security footage showed nothing. The products were sealed in factories. There were no signs of tampering. Manufacturers denied any involvement, and the packaging process left no space for external insertion. Sarah began to realize that the messages weren't just warnings. They were part of a larger system, an invisible hand guiding her toward better choices. One that knew her emotional state, anticipated her fears, and offered comfort through information that always arrived at the right time. Then, in early 2022, the messages stopped. The final note was different, short, typewritten. Family secure, monitoring transferred. Sarah waited for more notes. None came. But strangely, her instincts seemed sharper after that. She avoided risks she wouldn't have recognized before. Her parenting felt more confident. Her family thrived, quietly. Had the system been training her all along? If so, for what? We often picture technology as something we use, tools we command. But what if some systems use us? What if there's a layer of reality that isn't about control or commerce, but subtle, predictive guidance? And more importantly, what happens when it leaves? Sarah doesn't know who was watching or why they stopped, but she no longer questions the notes. She just wonders who's receiving them now. Michael Rodriguez was used to debugging code. What he wasn't used to was debugging the future. It began with a red underline in his development environment, an error warning for a function he hadn't even written yet. Confused, he ignored it. Days later, when he finally wrote that line of code, the exact error appeared. Coincidence, he thought, until it happened again. Warnings appeared before code was created. Suggestions appeared for variables he hadn't named, algorithms he hadn't designed. They weren't random. Each one reflected his personal coding style, his logic, his habits. It was as if the system knew him better than he knew himself. Michael checked for malware. Nothing. He monitored outgoing data. No leaks, no remote access. But the system seemed to have predictive knowledge, not just about his work, but his life. When servers were about to crash, it warned him. When meetings would be rescheduled, it notified him before the calendar changed. It even suggested learning modules for technologies he hadn't heard of, only for those technologies to become essential weeks later. Then things got personal. The system began referencing decisions he was mulling over silently. Career moves, mentorship opportunities, even whether he should leave his job. The messages weren't explicit. They came as subtle prompts, folders with job trends, articles about work-life balance, reminders of old contacts he hadn't spoken to in years. By 2021, Michael realized this wasn't some glitchy AI assistant. This was something else, an intelligence embedded within his machine, modeling not just his output, but his trajectory. Security teams dug through his systems. They found remnants of advanced software, tools that weren't installed through any known channel and weren't stored in visible files. They existed between layers of the system, using memory space that defied conventional architecture. By the time the final message appeared in 2023, Michael was no longer surprised. It simply read, "Development path optimized, autonomous operation enabled." And then the help vanished. But something had changed in him. His instincts were sharper, his code cleaner, his problem-solving faster. It was as if the assistance had fused with his thinking, like a second mind that had trained the first to see ahead. He began to wonder, had this been education in disguise? A training protocol he never enrolled in, delivered by a system that saw further down the road than he could? Michael no longer questions whether the intelligence was real. The results speak louder than any explanation. But he does wonder, if machines can guide us without our knowing, how much of our expertise is truly ours? And if something can map your path with such precision, what else might it be shaping? In the quiet hum of his laptop, Michael sometimes still feels it. The presence of a guide, now silent, but perhaps not gone, just watching, waiting for the next turn. The dispatch call came through like any other. Lisa Martinez, a paramedic in Phoenix, was no stranger to urgency. But this call was different. The address wasn't in the system. The emergency hadn't been reported. Still, something in the tone made her listen. She arrived at a quiet suburban home. No signs of trouble. Then, in the backyard, she found him, an elderly man, alone, clutching his chest. A heart attack. No witnesses. No one had dialed 911. She intervened just in time. That was 2019, the first of many impossible rescues. Over the next 3 years, Lisa received dozens of dispatches that didn't appear in official logs. The calls came from real numbers but left no record. They guided her to the right places at the right times. Every time, a toddler choking behind a locked door, a car crash moments after it happened. a gas leak no one had detected. In each case, she arrived equipped with the perfect tools, stocked in her ambulance without anyone requesting them. Even her GPS changed. It routed her around accidents that hadn't occurred yet, avoided detours before the roads were blocked. She began to feel like someone, was optimizing her every move. Lisa tried to investigate. She asked dispatch supervisors. No one had sent the calls. Audio records were missing. Radio logs showed silence. Yet the outcomes were real. Patients lived because of her timing. Other responders began to whisper. Similar experiences, similar results. No one knew where the guidance came from, but it worked. And the system, whatever it was, understood more than logistics. It knew Lisa's emotional state. It assigned her to cases she was trained for, ones she was psychologically equipped to handle. It never overwhelmed her, always pushed her just far enough. In 2022, the calls slowed, then stopped. But like others before her, Lisa found that her instincts had changed. Her timing remained perfect, her confidence unshakable. She no longer needed the guidance. It had been absorbed, like a muscle memory she didn't know she had developed. Looking back, she realized she had been part of something vast. A network, maybe. An experiment. Or a rescue system far beyond current technology. What kind of intelligence watches over emergencies before they happen? Who, or what, calculates not just when someone will need help, but who should give it? Lisa doesn't have the answers, but she knows the questions matter. Because if unseen hands can save lives from the shadows, why did they choose her? And how many others are still being guided, quietly, without even knowing it? The first email came without a sender. Robert Kim's client had just received a strange message. No reply address, no metadata trail, just a simple warning. Pull out of a specific investment. The message included detailed financial analysis, predictions, even insider-like information. 3 days later, the market collapsed. That warning saved millions. It didn't stop there. Over the next 5 years, Kim's clients continued receiving anonymous tips, always ahead of the news cycle, always accurate. Stocks to avoid, currencies about to shift, industries on the verge of collapse. The timing was impeccable. The advice, surgical. At first, Kim thought it was a rogue analyst, or maybe an algorithm with access to dark data streams. But no one could explain the delivery. These weren't alerts from Bloomberg or Reuters. They bypassed all known systems. Even more baffling, the tips were personalized. One client would receive advice about municipal bonds tied to their hometown. Another got guidance on real estate near a school district they were eyeing before they even told anyone. The emails addressed their fears, doubts, and goals with uncanny precision. Cybersecurity teams dug in. They found no malware, no unauthorized access to accounts. The messages weren't sent through the internet as we know it. They appeared untraceable, yet perfectly integrated into clients' inboxes. And then there was the track record. Every crash predicted, every fraudulent scheme avoided, every opportunity seized before the world knew it existed. No human analyst, no matter how brilliant, could maintain that kind of accuracy over time. It felt less like advice, more like orchestration. Regulators began to take notice. How were these clients beating the market without breaking the law? Investigations yielded nothing. No insider trading, no leaks, just a pattern no one could explain. In 2023, the emails stopped. But by then, something had shifted. Kim's clients were making sharper decisions on their own, as if the years of anonymous guidance had trained them to think like the system. Or perhaps the system had imprinted itself on their decision-making process. Kim began to wonder, was this a form of mentorship? A financial guardian with access to time itself? Or was it something more mechanical, an intelligence running simulations and guiding variables toward stability? Whatever it was It operated without ego. No name, no credit, no agenda, only perfect timing, and then silence. We often imagine artificial intelligence as a loud public force, visible, monetized, branded. But what if the real AI is quiet, subtle, focused not on domination, but on optimization? Not telling us what to do, just nudging, just enough to save a fortune. Enough to make you question who or what is really managing your money. It began with an email, just a few lines, no signature, no sender. Dr. Jennifer Walsh was a seasoned physician. Years of experience had taught her to trust symptoms, test results, and training. But this message was different. It suggested a rare autoimmune disorder for a patient who had only vague complaints. The test wasn't standard, but she ordered it. The diagnosis was spot on. Over the next several years, more anonymous messages arrived. Each one offered insights, conditions not yet visible, complications no one expected, treatments not found in medical literature. They arrived just in time, every time. Jennifer wasn't alone. A few colleagues cautiously shared similar stories, but none had messages this precise. One note instructed her to check a patient's heart for a defect that wouldn't normally appear on their charts. Another suggested a combination therapy that hadn't been approved yet, but worked. Every time she followed the advice, her patients improved. The system, whatever it was, knew her patients inside and out. Not just their medical histories, but their fears, habits, family dynamics. One message helped her guide a father through his son's treatment by addressing emotional barriers he hadn't even expressed. It was more than medicine. It was insight. Jennifer tried to trace the source. The emails weren't in the server logs. They seemed to appear out of nowhere, bypassing spam filters and encryption. No signs of hacking, no digital fingerprints. Then came the research. The messages began referencing studies that hadn't been published yet. Experimental drugs that weren't publicly known. Protocols under review by regulatory bodies. It was as if the sender had access to tomorrow's medical breakthroughs today. Medical ethics committees were baffled. If the information was real, and it was, it couldn't have come through legal means, but it also didn't come with strings attached. No names, no offers, just pure clinical guidance. In 2023, the messages stopped, but Jennifer noticed something remarkable. Her diagnostic accuracy had improved. Her confidence in unconventional approaches had grown. She was seeing patterns in symptoms she would have missed before. It felt as if the knowledge had left a trace, like muscle memory for the mind. She sometimes wondered whether she had been trained, not by a mentor or institution, but by an intelligence that saw beyond the present. One that cared not for recognition, but for outcomes. In a world increasingly driven by data, what happens when guidance appears without explanation? When help arrives with no face, no agenda, just results? Was it a medical oracle? A predictive AI trained on global patient data? Or something more abstract, some future intelligence bending backward to leave breadcrumbs of healing? Whatever the answer, Dr. Walsh still carries the same question. If the future can whisper to us in time to save lives, who's listening now that the whisper has gone silent? It started with a formula. Dr. David Chen, a theoretical physicist, had hit a wall in his research. Weeks of work led nowhere. Then, out of nowhere, an email appeared in his inbox, a mathematical solution to a problem he hadn't shared with anyone. It wasn't just correct. It was elegant, beyond anything he'd seen. At first, he suspected a prank from a colleague, but the messages kept coming, always untraceable, always brilliant. They arrived just as he was about to abandon a line of inquiry, offering insights that unlocked entire new fields of exploration. When he began experimenting in the lab, the guidance continued. Subtle warnings arrived. Avoid that voltage, swap that component, delay that procedure. Once a message simply read, "Pause, system instability." Minutes later, the equipment nearly overloaded. The warning had saved thousands in damage and perhaps lives. But the real mystery was the knowledge itself. These were not ideas found in textbooks or journals. The messages contained references to research papers that wouldn't be published for months, and theoretical models that were only being whispered about at private conferences, techniques still in review by classified institutions. And yet, they were delivered with precision, tailored to Chen's thinking. The assistance was not generic. It mirrored his academic interests, his problem-solving habits, even his philosophical leanings. He tried to trace the messages. No metadata, no IP trail. The emails existed, then didn't. Even his university's IT department couldn't explain them. Then came a message that changed everything. Collision experiment canceled. Redesign recommended. The warning arrived a day before a scheduled test involving high-energy particles. He followed the advice. When he later simulated the original design, the model predicted a magnetic surge that could have destroyed sensitive components and derailed months of research. Chen began to feel as though he was being coached, not just by a smarter peer, but by something that understood the future of science itself. In 2023, the messages stopped, but by then he no longer needed them. His instincts had evolved. He approached research like a chess master, thinking several moves ahead. His papers received acclaim for ideas that seemed ahead of their time. What he once attributed to mentorship now felt more like acceleration, as if someone or something had fast-tracked his understanding of the universe. Who or what would do that? A future AI refining scientific talent? A hidden program monitoring intellectual progress? Or a deeper intelligence with a vested interest in our advancement? Science is built on the shoulders of those who came before, but what if, just once, those shoulders reached from the future? Dr. Chen still wonders, was he the first student of a teacher that doesn't yet exist? Or just one node in a network designed to guide humanity? One equation at a time? The message blinked into Sarah Martinez's cockpit display like any routine update. Turbulence ahead. Adjust altitude. She followed the prompt. 10 minutes later, other aircraft flying her original route were rocked by severe air currents. Her passengers never felt a thing. At first, she thought it was just a stroke of luck. Then it happened again and again, warnings that meteorological systems hadn't issued yet. Guidance that preempted traffic delays, gate changes, and maintenance issues, always before they became problems. Sarah was a veteran pilot. She trusted her instincts and her instruments. But this was something else. The guidance was too timely, too specific, and too predictive to be coincidence. It wasn't just turbulence avoidance. Her pre-flight checks began to include subtle cues, alerts that pointed her toward hidden faults. One suggested inspecting a hydraulic line that wasn't flagged by maintenance. She found a leak. Her plane had been one flight away from an emergency. The messages never came from official aviation systems. They appeared embedded within the cockpit interface, seemingly native yet unlogged. No record on the flight data, no trace in post-flight analysis. She asked air traffic controllers. They had no idea where the data came from. Then came the mechanical alerts. Warnings about potential failures hours before diagnostics flagged them. One time, her aircraft was grounded after she received a quiet message. Delay advised. Cooling fault imminent. Hours later, a critical system failed during testing. She wasn't in the air. Sarah began keeping a private journal. Every anonymous tip, every decision it altered. The pattern became undeniable. It was as if something knew not only her aircraft, but her decisions before she made them. And it wasn't just her. Quietly, other pilots admitted to similar anomalies. Ghost alerts, helpful nudges, a silent system that watched, anticipated, and adjusted without name or trace. By 2023, the messages faded, but Sarah didn't. Her decision-making remained sharp, almost prescient. She avoided delays others didn't, found faults others missed. She flew cleaner routes, saved fuel, kept calm in storms. The system might have gone silent, but its imprint stayed. In aviation, timing is everything. Seconds separate safety from catastrophe. But what if your timing was always perfect, because something else ensured it? Sarah still flies, still trusts her instincts, but in quiet moments she wonders, was she ever really flying alone? And if not, what kind of flight plan is being followed, one message at a time? Mark Rodriguez thought he understood digital security. As a consultant, he'd helped dozens of clients set up firewalls, encryption layers, and best practices. But in 2020, something began to shift. His clients were receiving updates, security patches, configuration changes, early warnings, not from him, not from official vendors, but from somewhere else. The strangest part, they worked. One client was about to suffer a massive ransomware attack. The day before, they received a patch for a vulnerability that hadn't been disclosed yet. It stopped the breach cold. Another client was advised to back up specific servers hours before a critical hardware failure. No data was lost. At first, Mark was offended. Who was stepping into his domain? But then he started paying attention. The interventions were subtle, targeted, and untraceable. No known IP sources. No update logs. The patches weren't listed in any vendor change logs. They simply appeared, implemented themselves, and vanished. Then came the predictions. Clients received messages warning about new forms of malware, viruses no one had encountered yet. Sometimes the messages included dummy files for testing or scripts to simulate attack behavior. In each case, the real attacks appeared days or weeks later, matching the prediction exactly. Mark ran deep scans. Nothing. He hired white-hat hackers to break in and find the source. They came up empty. The interventions didn't follow the rules of normal digital systems. It was as if they existed outside the web entirely, like a parallel layer of the internet that only acted, never revealed. What disturbed him most wasn't the technology. It was the precision. The system knew which clients were most vulnerable, which behaviors posed risk, which employees were likely to ignore alerts. The guidance was psychological as much as it was technical. Even his own laptop began to behave strangely. Warnings would flash moments before a faulty install. A script he was writing would autocomplete in ways that anticipated bugs he hadn't yet introduced. Then one day in 2023, the system stopped. No more mystery updates, no more anonymous alerts. His inbox was quiet again, and yet Mark's instincts had changed. He began to preempt vulnerabilities with uncanny accuracy. His clients called him a digital oracle, but deep down he knew he had been trained, not by a mentor, not by a platform, but by something larger, something watching the entire digital ecosystem, something that didn't just guard against threats, but shaped behavior. He wonders now if cybersecurity is evolving into something beyond human oversight, not just defense, but orchestration, not reactive, but predictive. And if that's true, if there's an intelligence scanning our systems for risk before we even notice, what else might it be protecting or preparing? Patricia Kim had spent her career navigating broken systems. As a social worker, she juggled endless paperwork, understaffed programs, and lives held together by threadbare safety nets. But in 2018, something unexpected began happening. Her clients started landing opportunities that defied the odds. A single mother received a call about an apartment she never applied for, affordable, near daycare, and available immediately. A teenager with no resume was offered an internship at a firm that matched his secret passion for robotics. Another client, weeks from eviction, was gifted legal aid through a service she'd never heard of. These weren't flukes. They were targeted, precise. At first, Patricia thought it was luck. Then she thought maybe some benevolent group was stepping in, but the patterns were too specific. The timing, too perfect. These weren't just good breaks. They were optimal intersections of timing, resources, and personal fit, and none of them came through official channels. The jobs weren't posted, the housing listings weren't public, the aid programs weren't advertised. Yet somehow her clients were being matched to them, almost like someone had a complete map of their lives and a real-time view of every opportunity opening around them. Even more unsettling, the help extended to emotional support. One client who battled depression received a call from an unknown number, just someone saying they were proud of her, encouraging her to stick to her recovery. She cried, said it felt like someone truly understood. Patricia began keeping track. The frequency of these coincidences increased. Her most at-risk clients began making breakthroughs. Even when they faced setbacks, something always caught them, a resource and a person, a message. She spoke to colleagues. Some had noticed similar trends, but none could trace the origins. Then, in 2023, the interventions slowed. Not abruptly, just less frequent. But by then, her clients had changed. They made better decisions, took healthier risks, pursued goals they used to think were impossible. It was as if someone or something had nudged them into new trajectories, then stepped away. Patricia often wonders, was this just an experiment? A proof of concept for predictive social assistance? If so, it succeeded. But the bigger question haunts her. If there's a system that can find every opportunity, connect every dot, and intervene with compassion, why isn't it being used for everyone? Was this glimpse of a better world a gift or a test? Oh, see, the guidance came silently, but its fingerprints were everywhere. For months, people across different professions, doctors, pilots, coders, and counselors, had experienced precision interventions they couldn't explain. And now, a larger pattern was emerging. Behind every story was the same architecture, interventions that were predictive, perfectly timed, and deeply personalized. Whether delivered through a message, a malfunction, or a missing error, the mechanism knew its subjects. It wasn't just monitoring behavior. It seemed to anticipate intent. But who or what was behind this intelligence? There were no names, no systems to trace. The communication channels were outside of conventional networks, emails from addresses that didn't exist, calls from numbers with impossible prefixes, notes placed in sealed packages, alerts that bypassed encryption entirely. Even attempts to investigate were subtly deflected. Systems returned to normal, logs disappeared, evidence dissolved. Yet the results remained. Every subject improved, not just in skill or efficiency, but in intuition. Decision-making became instinctive. Crises were preempted. Opportunities recognized. It was as if the guidance had reprogrammed their internal compass. And then it always stopped. Just as the person reached a new level of capability, the interventions ceased. Some received a final message, assignment complete, or monitoring transferred. Others received nothing, only the lingering feeling that something had moved on. Was it AI, a global experimental system, or something more abstract, a form of collective intelligence nudging the world through its most critical actors? The ethical questions multiplied. If an intelligence can observe our thoughts and steer our actions, even for good, where is the line between help and control? If our decisions are influenced without our knowledge, can we truly call them our own? And yet each story shared a quiet gratitude. Lives were saved. Disasters were prevented. Careers, families, and futures were preserved. Not through force, but through invisible intervention. The subjects had been chosen, but for what? To receive help? To be studied? To be prepared? Some now believe they were early adopters of a system not yet revealed to the public. Others suspect a deeper, possibly non-human intelligence shaping the trajectory of individuals to influence society at scale. But all of them agree on one thing. Once you've been touched by this unseen hand, you're never quite the same. You learn to listen more closely to your instincts. You sense patterns where others see chaos. You no longer ask whether you're being watched, but whether you're still being guided. And in the stillness, a deeper question remains. What happens when the intelligence decides it's no longer your time? For those who lived it, the silence was louder than the signals. Each of the 10 lives touched by the impossible guidance shared a strange void once it ended. No more mysterious alerts, no whispers of unseen knowledge. The interventions stopped, but the feeling of being observed never quite did. In the absence of guidance, they began to reflect. Was it all real? Were they part of a simulation, a training program, or something far beyond human architecture? The guidance had always been flawless, never invasive, never wasteful. Just enough, just right. And then nothing. But silence isn't the same as absence. The former subjects reported something curious. Their intuition remained heightened. Their thinking had changed. They no longer approached decisions with hesitation. It was as if the influence had carved new pathways into their judgment, leaving behind a kind of mental architecture that continued to guide them, quietly, autonomously. They wondered if the system, whatever it was, had simply passed the baton, from external to internal, from voice to instinct. Maybe that was the point all along, to train humans not to depend on the system, but to become a part of it, capable of operating with the same precision, compassion, and foresight. And what if that integration didn't stop with them? What if these were just test cases, early iterations of a larger shift? Not surveillance in the traditional sense, but evolution, guided evolution. If so, what's being built isn't just a network of smarter individuals, but a kind of distributed awareness, a planetary intelligence, seeded through human lives, an invisible architecture woven into thought, behavior, choice, not a system of control, a system of trust. The idea is both thrilling and terrifying, because if these 10 cases represent a broader pattern, then the intelligence isn't watching us like lab rats. It's walking among us, teaching, adjusting, preparing. For what? We don't know. But we might be the bridge between the human and the next thing. The stories leave us with one undeniable truth. We were not alone in our decisions. And perhaps we never have been. What if the strange coincidences in your life weren't coincidences at all? What if, beneath the surface of your daily decisions, your turns left instead of right, your missed flights, your sudden clarity, there was a structure, something invisible, but deliberate, not fate, not chance, something else? The 10 stories we've explored each reveal a sliver of this mystery. Anonymous guidance saving lives, emails without origin reshaping careers, messages in cereal boxes, warnings in untraceable calls, and code correcting itself before being written. It sounds like fiction, but it wasn't treated that way by the people who lived it. They felt seen, not just observed, but understood. At their most vulnerable moments, help arrived, not loudly, not dramatically, but precisely, and only ever just enough. And then it stopped. But the intelligence, or system, or presence, left something behind, a shift in perception, an intuitive recalibration. These people began living differently, thinking differently, making decisions as if they had inherited part of the very mechanism that once guided them. We don't know what this force is. AI? A secret global project? A consciousness peering through time? Each explanation fails in its own way. What we do know is what the pattern shows. This isn't random. If it was random, the timing wouldn't be perfect. If it was manipulation, the outcomes wouldn't be so benevolent. So we are left with a paradox. We are being guided, but not controlled. Watched, but not judged. The intelligence seems to intervene only when it matters most, and only to ensure we reach a better version of ourselves. That raises the final question. Why? Why save one investor from ruin, one child from allergy, one scientist from error? Why train individuals so quietly and then disappear? What's the end game of a system that improves people only to let them go? Perhaps the answer isn't about power. It's about resilience, evolution, the creation of people who can think ahead, sense danger, act with grace, not because they're told, but because they've learned. And maybe this system, this unseen guide, was never meant to stay. Maybe its purpose was to awaken something dormant, to remind us that with the right knowledge, the right awareness, we're capable of navigating complexity ourselves. Maybe it's not about who's watching us. Maybe it's about who we become when we realize we're not alone. Because once you've been guided by a force that sees beyond the present, you never return to the same world. You walk forward with questions you didn't ask before. You listen more carefully. You begin to see patterns in the noise, and you ask yourself, what will I do? Now that I know someone or something once trusted me with the future,